This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, we are going to start in a couple of minutes. Unfortunately, there has been a change of program because we were supposed to have Professor Koronen joining us today, but there were some technical difficulties. Essentially, he didn't know how to operate the conferencing platform. So what we have decided has been to postpone the event with Professor Koronen to next week, and it will happen according to a slightly different format. It will be a Q&A session. We will email you soon about this. So we still decided to way to essentially, keep you busy on Friday afternoon and arranged a seminar with a member of our network who will discuss a very recent paper of his published in a top journal. And I think Akis will introduce today's speaker. Akis, are you with us? Akis?
Hi. Hi, Andrea. Sorry, I had some technical problems here. I'm here. Shall we start or shall we wait a bit?
No, I think we can make a start also because Mario has got quite a tight schedule, so it's better we start in time. Of course, okay. We are recording this, so it will be made available to everybody.
Okay, we have the honor today to have with us Dr. Mario Pansera, who is one of the most leading experts on responsible innovation and a recent 2020 recipient of the prestigious ERC grant for a project on degrowth called PROSPERA. And today he is going to analyze us the potential of, let's say, going beyond this notion of economic growth, and whether there is a potential to have innovation and the possibility of actually changing our society to a much better extent. Mario, please, if you want to start.
Thank you very much, Efkaristo, Akis. I don't know how to share my screen. This is the first time I give presentation in GoToMeeting.
Next to the microphone and camera icons, there is a third one called screen. You just click that button and you will present.
Okay. Okay. I need to give permission because my Mac is obsessed with security and privacy. I think now I will be able to do that. Okay, they say that I need to restart GoToMeeting. Okay, just give me 1 second.
Okay. Yeah, so apparently technical difficulties are a constant for the speakers we wanted to have today. So let's see. Mario, can you present now?
The microphone.
Yeah, we can't see you and we can't hear you now.
Andrea, probably he cannot hear you.
Sorry? Yeah, okay, we can see that, but we cannot hear you and we can't see you. We can just see the screen. So
I think that we are ready now.
Okay, we are ready. So let's make a start.
Okay, so thank you very much, Andreas. Thank you very much, Akis. I must say that this was a quite rush presentation. But anyway, I will try to make my best to show what we are trying to do in the field of creating a different alternative view of innovation and technology. So as Aki said, the purpose of this seminar is to introduce you to my last paper published this week, 2 days ago actually, in the journal Organization, which is one of the journals of the critical management community. The title of the paper is Innovation Without Growth, Frameworks for Understanding Technological Change in a Post-Growth Era. However, I must say that more than answering questions, this paper was designed to make provocative questions. And these questions are not totally addressed by this preliminary work. That is why I would also take the chance to introduce my new grants as Akis introduce it. Is the title is PROSPERA, that in Italian means thrive. So the idea is this: how to frame innovation in a post-growth society or post-growth economy. This is an ERC grant, a grant funded by the European Research Council. It's about 1.5 million euros and will run for the next 5 years. So the paper is to say is somehow represent the theoretical background of the project. Okay, I start with this paper that was submitted more than 2 years ago, just to give you an idea of the times that you need to publish in a good journal in social science. And the paper contains the theoretical background of what is going to be the project. So more than the paper, what I want to do today is to present some guiding ideas that underpin the projects and the main research question that also will be at the center of the projects. However, this speech will be quite short because I don't want to again get into the details. If you have questions about the methodological details about the paper and the kind of idea from the methodological perspective that we will use during the projects, we can have the discussion after my presentation. What I want to do is to make some provocative questions. And I hope that this provocative question can stimulate the debate in our community as a retrace, and also a general debate about what is the meaning of innovation, what is the meaning of technology, and what are the implications for circular economy. Because I assume that most of us here are working in the field of circular economy. Okay, so if you have problem with my Spanish-Italian accent, please stop me and I will try to repeat. I think that everybody has an accent here, no? Okay, so today I want to talk about technology innovation, which is an issue that I'm very passionate about. But I don't want to talk it in a way, in a classical way. So I don't want to talk about how good is innovation, or how bad innovation can also be, right? What I want to do is to make these provocative questions, assuming that everyone has more or less a clear idea of what innovation means. So my first question is, what is innovation for? Or rather, for whom is innovation for? The gentleman in this picture, this is Joseph Schumpeter, an Austrian American economist. He was very sure about the meaning of innovation. For Schumpeter, innovation is the real engine of capitalism. Innovation is creation that destroys and makes obsolete all the pre-existing artifact practices, even culture and way of doing and way of being. So innovation generates mechanism of creative destruction, as Schumpeter used to say. No, it's a process of continuous destruction. And this creative destruction is the essential fact of capitalism. It's not, we are not talking about a byproduct of capitalism. We are talking about something that's without its capitalism as market economy as we know it, it wouldn't be possible at all. So capitalism can't exist without creating new things. No, this is the basic idea of the creative destruction of Schumpeter. So it needs to expand and growth. At the same time, capitalism cannot exist without destroying the old. No, so this is the idea of the innovation that Schumpeter had in mind. And of course, one can argue about what capitalism is or what it means. You know, there are many different formalization or conceptualization of capitalism. But it's clear that for Schumpeter, capitalism refers to production of goods and services at an industrial scale in a market economy. And this was at least clear for Schumpeter. That is more or less the kind of economy in which we all live, or I would say that the vast majority of humanity live in. So basically what Schumpeter said, I think, is evident today, is clear. Our economic system advances and survives through the creation of new products and services. However, the most interesting thing about this phenomenon is that along with this process of creative destruction, the system also comes with an ideology that is connected to this mechanism, continuously creating new things and destroying new things. And many will say a religion of growth, a faith. Innovation increases productivity, thus increasing the speed at which we exploit natural resources, and the process of capitalism accumulation accelerates, right? So innovation, as a consequence, is fundamental to generate economic growth, right? So without this engine, without this mechanism of creative destruction, we cannot have economic growth. So innovation equals economic growth. I call it a religion because basically, as any religion is based on dogmas that are usually immune to criticism and to empirical evidence that can potentially dismiss them. The dogma in this case is that we must grow. The last 2 decades were characterized in industrial countries by very low growth rates. So as a reaction, in this connection between innovation and growth, so that innovation equals growth, has become a kind of mantra. We have to grow, then we have to innovate. Why do we have to innovate? Because we have to grow. And so in a loop, in a vicious circle. Now it's pretty much evident that there are some limits, like some material limits to grow. And also in very competitive economies, like our economies, we are not growing. Actually, in some cases, especially after the 2008, or now with the COVID crisis, we are actually degrowing. So that the GDP, that this is the way we measure economic growth, is decreasing. But despite this idea, this irrational rush to economic growth, this idea that we must grow is so ingrained in Western world that we no longer wonder, tell me, why do we need to grow at all? Right? This is something that is going unquestioned. We never question why we need to grow. Of course, if you ask economists or even politicians, they have their answer. They would answer that we need growth because we need to create jobs, that we need to repay debts, that we need to enlarge the cake of the economies, because this is the only way we can distribute the fruits of growth, right? But I think that these answers are not very convincing, at least from my perspective. My answer is that we don't have to grow. We don't have to grow. At least it doesn't make any sense to grow indefinitely. In nature, no one's growth indefinitely, not even bacteria or viruses. A child grows, but then it stops. No, I have two kids. They are growing now very fastly. They are eating a lot, but at some point, hopefully, for my financial resources, because my financial resources are limited, I hope that one day they will stop, so they will become adult and stop growing, right? So there are many arguments. So I don't have here the intention to give you an overall picture of what are the main criticisms and critics to this idea of infinite growth. There are many arguments against growth. No, it is impossible to discuss it now. What is becoming quite clear from an increasing scientific literature on the topic is that there are very good reasons to think that there are at least two kinds of limits. Physical limits that are that are discussed and debated in the fields of ecological economics or in the fields of even physics, like the seminal work of Georgescu Rogan about the entropy of economic system, the fact that economy is a dissipative system that consume energy and material. But there are also like social limits. I'm talking about the fields of political ecology or the famous, very nice book by Fred Hirsch about the social limits to growth. No? The essential fact about this work is that the growth of indicators like the GDP does not guarantee us a qualitative improvement, or more recently, not even a quantitative improvements of our lives. No? Look at the fact that my generation is earning less than our parents in relative terms. Our life is more precarious and unstable, no? Despite having, despite the continuous growth of the last 30 years. So what does that have to do with innovation? Well, I said before that innovation is an essential fact of capitalism. And another essential fact of capitalism is the fact that capitalism needs expansion. So without innovation, there is no growth in this framing, in this way of thinking. No. So my question is, without growth, there is no innovation. So if we accept the fact that at a certain point in the near future, we will stop growing, or actually we already stopped in the Western country to grow. If you look at the macroeconomic indicators, that means that we have to abandon the idea of innovation. We have to abandon the idea of technological progress. We have to abandon this idea of creativity. I don't think so. But to explain this, we need to quickly see what kind of innovation we are talking about. We have to get a little bit deeper into this idea of innovation as a creative destruction that Schumpeter was referring to in the 30s and the 40s of the last century. So, in my opinion, this conventional idea of innovation is based on two basic assumptions. The first one is that technological progress is irreversible. And that's normally called in literature technological determinism. The second assumption is that this irreversible progress is always good and positive. And this can be called productivism. I think that these two assumptions are false. Let's see why I think this is true. Technological determinism is a myth, in my opinion, for many reasons. Today we know that technology evolves, and this evolution depends on the social political condition. No? In the first summer school in Sheffield, I gave a lecture to the Retrace group about the responsible innovation, in which we discussed the fact that technological development is a social constructed phenomenon. It means that the idea of the people and the ideology of the people who design technology are directly reflected into the implementation of this technology, of the technology that these people are producing. So any kind of technology evolves in a social political, and cultural environment. It's subjected to historical contingency and, of course, cultural environments. The design of a technological artifact, for example, we know that it depends on the vision, worldviews, ideology of its creators. The field of science and technology studies has shown this very well. No? In addition, we have documented the rapid development processes and time of stagnation. So there is no like a uniform, universal technological change. So the process of technological change is not deterministic, we can say. Moreover, we know that there is never one possible path of development, but always multiple paths with many alternatives. In other words, technological development is also and above all a matter of political choices. The anthropologist David Graeber wondered why we don't travel around in flying cars. In the 1960s, everyone thought that in the 20th century, 21st century, we would have arrived on Mars and had bases on the moon. What's happened? Well, it's happened that investment in space exploration was abandoned because it was no longer politically necessary. The Soviet Union collapsed, and the money was directed elsewhere. So it was no longer necessary. So productivism, and then we have productivism. That is another myth. Today we know very well that that not everything used is an improvement, and that not all technology are good. We could be talking for hours about it. All the controversies about nuclear power, genetic modified organisms, the problem of fracking, the impact of social media on teenager and on the election, on national election. So we know that technology can be good and technology can be bad as well, also dramatically bad. So, for example, I wouldn't say that GMO or fracking are, or the case of Bhopal, the disaster of Bhopal in India, are improvements. And above all, for whom this technology represents an improvement. In addition, there is a very important issue. If it is true that innovation is designed to solve problems, its implementation also causes other and new, unexpected problems. The productivist paradigm has no mechanism to reflect on problems generated when solving other problems. In other words, the way a new technology is introduced within the growth-driven or growth-addicted capitalism system doesn't take into account its potential negative consequences. Responsible innovation, the framework of responsible innovation, partially addresses this problem. It's an attempt to solve the problem from within the system. So then my next provocative question is the following. If there is no growth without innovation and there is no innovation without growth, and if growth is somehow bad, or at least something that is not sustainable for the future, are we doomed to live in a world without innovation, without change, without technological progress, without no creativity at all? I don't think so, and I believe that technological determinism and productivism actually carve creativity. To think that, I think all we can to think this to have this idea that all we can do is to create new products and services to sell in a competitive market, I think is a very limiting idea. And actually, I would say that it's a quite miserable idea, no? Very narrow kind of idea. We can think of a new idea of innovation that is not based on this idea of creative destruction, but on an idea based on ethics and practice of care, a creativity based on the potential to take care of things, to take care of the environment, to take care of people, rather than destroy old stuff and create new stuff. And this is more or less what people like Ivan Illich and Andrei Gorz call in convivial technologies. Technology whose purposes are not the market, or are not only the markets or the maximization of the indicators like GDP, but a purpose based on the ability of people to do things together in a convivial way. Ivan Illich convivial technology have several dimensions. I can mention some here, like accessibility, the capacity to have the possibility to access, modify, or take part in the process of design of any technology. The ability to create technology that can provide, that can solve social needs, not only to provide benefits and profits or increase profits. Here, I don't want to get into the details, because I want to invite you, everybody, to read this wonderful book. One is Tool for Conviviality, and the second one is Ecology as Politics. So I would like everyone in this room to read this book. What I want to do is to get a little bit to introduce you some of the details of the paper. The paper gives this theoretical introduction, and then make another provocative question. We know that economic growth is not a very good idea. We know that probably it doesn't solve social problems. We know that probably it creates more social problems and environmental problems. And we know that the idea of innovation and technological progress that we have now is very limited. How an innovation process and how organizations that are creating innovation would look like in a society that is not obsessed with economic growth. This was the guiding research question of this paper. And in order to answer that, we ran a preliminary analysis of what we think are those organizations that are already decoupling innovation and creativity from economic growth. So here in this slide, there is a picture that is linked to one of each one of the cases that we present in the paper. The first one is the movement of appropriate technology, started by Fritz Schumacher. The second one is the network that was created in 2004 in Brazil to address through technology, through very simple and affordable technology, problems in rural area in Brazil. A third case study is the grassroots innovation movements. That is a sort of evolution of appropriate movements, appropriate technology movements of the 70s. The fourth case is the case of the social co-ops movements in Italy. That's been very influential, especially in the center and the north of Italy from the 70s. And the last case is the case of peer production, the idea of Pub Labs, makers community, open source community like Linux, or open hardware community. So I invite everybody to read the paper. So instead of entering into methodological details of the paper, I would like to just to introduce some of the results of the paper that are summarized in this table. So essentially, what we have done is to create a first line to distinguish between what we have called growth-oriented organization and post-growth oriented organization. And we analyzed the differences between these two kind of ideal kind of classification or typology of organization using 9 dimensions. So, for example, the first dimension is the underpinning values that are guiding the two different kind of organization, the pro-growth organization and the post-growth organization. And what we found is that normally people working in the post-growth organization are more likely to be guided and driven by concepts like social justice, equality. So they feel that their work is also a political component. Then there is also like other dimensions that are more related to the kind of production and the kind of goods that are produced by such organization. For example, underpinning resourcing in conventional organization are characterized by appropriation of common resources like water, land, natural resources, even public goods and labor. Why many of the cases that we analyzed have a different way of sharing, a different way of using resources. So they are most of the time they are working on this notion of public commons. They valorize or reinforce community democratic control over technology as a completely different way of framing the kind of resources that organization needs. And then there are differences in the terms of ownership versus and governance. So, for example, there is a clear tendency in post-growth oriented organization towards a more democratic organization within factories. For example, if you consider phenomenon like open source, there is no organization at all that is completely distributed. There is difference in production and consumption partners. For example, post-growth organization tends to be more local, to use shorter value chain, and most importantly, to involve consumer in the decision making about what to produce and how to produce. Now, I have an example. 90% of my food here in my village is produced by a couple of people that I know. So I can go there and see what they're doing, and I can also, make a suggestion to the way they are producing my food, the food that I'm consuming. There are other characteristics, like for example, the way surplus is produced and used is very different in the two cases. Post-growth oriented organization tends to reinvest the surplus, and the problem is that most of these organizations don't have a lot of surplus, but when they generate surplus, normally they have mechanism to decide democratically how to use and how to invest this surplus. There is enormous difference in the way intellectual property is framed and conceptualized. Most of post-growth oriented organizations are against patenting, for example. So of course there are alternative form of protecting intellectual property like open source, free license, distribute form of knowledge production, etc. And then there are also important differences in the way technology is designed. No? Growth-oriented organization tends to be huge with big R&D departments. They tends to rely a lot on expert knowledge, expert design, highly reliant on science output. And of course, there is also this phenomenon of planned obsolescence. Why? Because they are designed to create, not to care about things. They are designed to create products that goes to the markets and as quick as possible end up in a landfill, right? On the other side, we have models that, together with technology and science and expert knowledge, combine this knowledge with other form of knowledge. Like some of the cases in Brazil, for example, combine expert knowledge with indigenous knowledge. No? They tend to produce convivial form of technology by using other form of knowledge, more empirical form of knowledge that are produced within the community, not only in the lab. It is important to say that post-growth oriented organization, at least the kind of organization and cases that I analyzed, they are not anti-science, they are not anti-technology, they don't reject technology, they just attempt to include other sources of knowledge, other sources of production of knowledge. Finally, we can talk about different forms of power relationship. Organization, like more conventional organization, think, for example, of big multinational corporation, are usually embedded in socioeconomic clusters that tend to escape democratic control. For example, think about all the international treaty about free trade. They are, none of them is transparent. No, nobody has access to the negotiation phase of this treaty. So it's very difficult to understand how the decision making is how decisions are taken within this negotiation. They enjoy the support of political elites and scientific institutions. On the other side, we have found organizations that usually rely on social, on local social network, like the case of social cops in Italy. No, their life is based on the legitimacy they have in the community. Some of these organizations explicitly challenge the dominant power structure in the search of social emancipation and autonomy. No, we have formal organizations that overly challenge the power structure that in some cases create like discrimination and social exclusion. So what is clear, what is crystal clear in the cases of post-growth oriented organization is that those organizations see themselves as a political instrument of social transformation. I think this is probably one of the most relevant results of the study. And finally, the scale, and this is not surprising. The usual conventional business as usual and conventional organization tends to have a different scale, but have a tendency to huge aggregation oligopolies. In some of the cases that we have analyzed, we are talking about reduced scale or at least distribute scale, like in the case of open source community. No, we don't. You cannot identify a specific organization, so you cannot talk about scale in the conventional way. And then they have an important characteristic that instead of scaling up in terms of size, they tend to reproduce the model instead of scaling up. So, for example, many of the social cooperative that the people that I interview in social cooperative movements, they say we don't want to become bigger, because if we become bigger, our internal democracy will collapse. So what we want to do is to replicate. We want to be contagious. We want other people, other organizations to replicate our structure. We don't want to grow. So this is very important to me. I mean, this is a very relevant kind of differences. So, and finally, to conclude, I want to introduce a little bit the structure of my new research grant. Because why? Because this paper is just an introduction. As I see at the beginning of the speech, this paper creates more question than the question that aspires to address. So I think there are a lot of open questions and that are very exciting questions. So I invite you to read the paper and to get inspiration from the paper and to create your own research question based on the paper. So the structure of the projects. This is going to be like a very long project, quite complicated project. This will be based on 4 main research work packages. So the idea is to answer this basic 4 research questions that are also mentioned at the end of the paper. The first one is to try to combine all the academic traditions and scholarship and disciplines that have theorized the possibility and necessity to formulate alternative view on science, technology, and innovation. Why? Because we have a lot of community that perceive each other as competitors, while actually I think them as complementary community. For example, you have critical theorists. You have now a very increasingly influential community like the degrowth community. You have ecological economics. You have people talking about steady state economics. You have a lot of people talking about social innovation. So you have a lot of people that are talking essentially about the different, exactly the same things, but coming from different backgrounds. So I think it's important to articulate this idea of post-growth innovation in a coherent manner that is able to to create links between these communities. Second, it's important to focus on the organization as a nucleus, as a core in which technological change occur, and to understand what are the antecedent enabler and values that drive the emergence of non-growth oriented organization. And we will try to do in 10 cross-national case studies. So the idea is to understand how these organizations that are already experimenting with this post-growth idea of innovation are organizing themselves, are surviving, are struggling, or how they are thriving. Third research question: what are the conditions and mechanisms that may allow non-growth organizations to form networks? Because what we observed is that many times you have an occupied factory, for example, that is struggling with against the surrounding environment. Because when you are creating something alternative to the system, you have you find yourself surrounded by a hostile environment. So your provider, your supplier are no longer selling you products, for example, not because it's no longer convenient, but because if they do that and you as an alternative organization, you prove that your model is successful, this is a symbol. So the surrounding environment will do anything to crush you. So it's important to see how alternative organization can organize in networks. Finally, and I think this is probably the most exciting research question in terms of political action, I think it's important to understand what are the social actors and their allies who can inspire or who can trigger this transition toward the post-growth science and technology and innovation system. Why? Because in my opinion, without political action, change is not possible. So we can have a very nice theoretical model about how post-growth organization should work, but without an alliances of social actors that are willing to implement these alternative models, we basically won't go anywhere. So I finished my speech, and I hope that my short presentation really stimulates the debate. Even though you disagree with me on certain aspects, I really hope the idea was not to agree on something. The idea was to stimulate the debates, and also make by making provocative questions that in some cases can be quite disturbing. Okay, I finished.
Thank you, Mario. And is there any questions? Somebody would like to ask questions? I have a couple of questions, but let's give precedence to somebody else. So there is Amos in the Mariana. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yes. Hi, everybody. Yeah, a lot of things. I agree with the debate, but actually I agree with you. And so thank you for your presentation, Mario. But my question is really simple. Why you call it post-growth and not degrowth? Is there any marketing there or any specific reason?
I think that the reason is very simple, because this paper is within a special issue that is about post-growth economies. So basically the title was adjusted to the special issue title. So I'm very sympathetic, as some of you would know about the notion of degrowth. We can argue if degrowth is a happy word, in the sense that it's a positive, that vehiculates a positive idea, or a negative or unattracting idea of reduction is something negative, right? I can say that I like the slogan degrowth as a slogan, as a political provocation, and this was the idea. The initial idea of degrowth was not to create like a theory or like a precise label to be attached to a specific academic discipline. The origin of the degrowth, it was just a provocation. But if you want to talk about the marketing of this idea, I think that we need to work on different fronts. I think that there are people that will be persuaded, like me, by the terms degrowth, and so that's okay. There are a lot of people that would be much more easily persuaded by something like post-growth or steady-state economy. I'm talking about most of the economies that I know, for example. So I don't reject degrowth, but I think that we need to use different fronts, and we need to use different way of talking about basically the same essential arguments. That is how we reframe our economy that in a way that is compatible with life, social life, and environmental life. That's all.
Okay, thank you.
Amos has a question. Amos, is there any harmony between ethics and profits? Yes, I think it depends on how you frame and how you define what is the legitimate level of profits. I mean, this is a very easy and basic topic. The problem is that we, in our society, we haven't decided what is the legitimate level of profits that an individual can achieve. If we can decide it, we can say, for example, in the last book on the growth by the growth committee in Barcelona, they propose some caps, and these caps are very high. Now we are talking about like millions of euros. So I mean, it's a post-growth society can be perfectly compatible with the cap on income that can be 1 million, 2 million, 3 million euros. Also depends on the cultural settings, no? The 1 million, for example, in Zimbabwe can be a lot. So I mean, we don't even have this debate about caps, putting a caps of income. We don't have it. I don't know if I answer your question, Amos, but I think this is a problem of it's a problem of deciding what are the limits of individual profits.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Mario. I have a question, and it's something you have touched upon in your presentation. I think your typology of organizations is quite interesting. But I think the reality is that these days we don't have any more vertically integrated firms. We have firms which produce something, some components, and they sell it to somebody else, will assemble it, and then these semi-finished goods will be assembled into a more complex products, and so on. Even if you apply these, to cooperatives in the agricultural setting, well, I'm doing at secondment, as you know, at the moment as part of the Proceeds project in an agricultural cooperative. So technically what we could classify as a sort of post-growth organization, because they embrace this view, we don't want to become massive, we want to stay the size we are, we distribute the surplus to our members. Then in the end, they sell the things they produce, the lemons they produce, to have a safe income and to have safe revenues. They sell it to big supermarkets. So the question I'm asking to you is, how realistic is in a world where we have global value chains, where we have interconnected supply chains, how realistic is to embrace this model in a world where it's very difficult to have an organization which takes care of all the aspects of production of goods and services?
Well, I think it's very positive, your question, because this was the idea, is to provoke such a question. I don't have the answer of this question. What I can say is that what we present in the paper is an initial model, and the goal of the model is just to create a space to debate that the importance of creating a different frameworks in which we can discuss about the possibility of creating organizations that are not driven by growth. So as a result, the classification is a very ideal. It's a very ideal classification. And of course, it cannot apply as it is in the real world, because the real world is much more complex. And as we show in one of the cases of the social co-ops, for example, the social co-ops make a lot of compromises for survival, basically. What you say, it seems to be more a mix of what I say at the end of political action. No, the fact that there are people willing to experiment alternative forms of organization, the fact that there are people that are willing to buy the things that they need for their survival, for their livelihood, to this kind of organization, is not enough. Now you need a political engagement. You need also political movements that will create law, for example, that favor this form of organization, and create incentive to create this organization. But even though you will never be sure that these new forms will not be co-opted, like the case of the classical cooperatives in Italy, that are totally now under the capitalist mode of production. So I don't have a clear answer to this.
But I think you are absolutely right. What I would suggest, and this is something that maybe we can look at together, is that probably what we need to look at is not post-growth organizations, but probably post-growth supply chains, value chains, supply networks. So how to have a network of organizations which cooperate to create value, sharing these underlying assumptions.
No, definitely. But this is what the third question is, and to create networks. Probably I wouldn't. Okay. I was not so precise. I didn't spend a lot of time talking about this. Idea.
That's fine. Thank you. There is Akis who would like to ask a question.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Mario. Going to work package 1 and talking about critical thinking. I think that one of the most critical schools of thought was Frankfurt. And in 30s, there was the debate between Adorno and Benjamin whether the entry of technology then could lead to the politicization of consumer society. So Benjamin, let's say, was quite optimistic. Adorno was not so much. And as we see, today, the consumer society has become the leader of this growth paradigm. So making the connection also with what Andrea asked and you discussed after it, do you think that in order to actually achieve a transition towards a post-growth society, that it would be necessary to go beyond the contemporary urbanized system that we are all living in? And speaking about supply chains, I think that the post-growth paradigm existed for many years. And we can see it if we compare the North and South Europe. In North Europe, there is nothing like local production, nothing like personal relationships between a butcher or a shop. Everything is online, everything is mass. We are talking about massive orders always. So don't you think that a transition, that in order to achieve a transition, that we should overcome the classic urbanized society that we are all living in? Thank you.
Okay, I think that you make many questions in one question.
Yeah.
So if the main question, I think, is that is this idea of a post-growth organization compatible with the present social order? we say clearly at the end of the paper, I don't think it is. So a post-growth society or post-growth organization that is creative, but in the way that takes care about people and things and environment. For us in the paper, it is very clear, as written at the end of the paper, is not compatible with the present social order. But this is our ideological position. And then if the other question is about urban, and this is a much more complex one, I don't know. I personally speaking, I'm not a big fan of coming back to land. I don't think that the life in the rural area 50 years ago were a paradise. Yeah? It was full of oppression, unequal social relationship. So I don't think that the key is to come back to the land. What is true and what is evident, and this is one of the main results of the ecological economics field, is that if you analyze the social metabolism of cities in the way they are now, so the big city, they are not compatible with the sustainable use of resources. I mean, this is evident. This is something that is clear. So we need to find a different balance between urban life and rural life, I think. And the second point that I want to be very clear, because many times people say, "No, you want to come back to the cave." Post-growth organizations are not organizations that are low-tech. Convivial technology are not necessarily low-tech technology. We are talking about a different way of deciding, of making decision about technology, not a different level of sophistication. What is true is that in many cases, sophistication is usually attached to the interest of the creative destruction. So the result of this is that the capitalist system is producing highly sophisticated technology. But there is nothing that make me think that in a post-society, in a post-growth society, we will be living in a world that I cannot buy at the computer that I'm using now. That is a Mac. So I want to be very clear about that. Degrowth or post-growth is not coming back to land in this ideal world in which we all live in the field and we are all happy, or in the cave, or come back to a hunter-gatherer community.
Thank you, Mario.
Just to clarify, I didn't mean.
And sorry, Akis, I mean, we have other questions.
Okay.
Mario needs to go soon. I think this is time for last question. Renato, would you like to go on?
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Mario, for your very interesting and challenging presentation. So I have a couple of questions. The first one is a consideration about what you say about the fair to scale up of small cooperatives or companies. This fair, according to this fair to scale up, does represent a limit in terms of economic advantages for people, for producers, but also for consumers. And this brings a couple of other questions, like the first one is about the democracy in the governance of these companies. So the question is if the democratic governance of small firms or cooperatives as institutions has a cost. Okay, and this brings another question it is very relevant to build up networks, communities, as you said, and how to build these communities. And this is a part of your research agenda. In particular, is your research question 3 that also Andrea mentioned. If this is correct, does this mean that the higher costs are supported by consumers, let's say markets in general? And the second question is another question is more general, according to your research path. Is it possible, according to you, in your research path, that it has alternatives, that is innovation with growth can be reachable, can be considered, or is completely out of your perspective? Thank you.
Okay, I start by answering the second question very quickly because I need to go in 5 minutes. The second question, I don't think we have to question growth in any cases. I think there are many sectors in which growth must be pursued. So, for example, in the so-called, I hate this expression, developing world, and I use the expression global south. There are sectors in which we need growth, quantitative growth. And even in our society, in terms about public education, and the problem is that we are framing in a wrong way. We use the word growth. We could have used different expression. So I'm not against growth per se. I'm against the obsession of growth. I'm against putting growth at the center of our goal as a society, which is very different. I think that in many sectors, in the North and in the global South, we need to increase, for example, the material consumption of many people in the global South. And you can do this with redistribution of wealth, for example. So we can have innovation for growth in certain cases. The first question is about, in this new world of very nice world populated by post-growth organization, will be the consumer that will pay this extra cost of democracy? I mean that democracy is a cost for a company. Internal democracy is a company because they are competing with non-democratic conventional forms of organization, and that's why we need the law. That's why we need the state, or we need the community to regulate, because we have to create incentives that allow this community of producers that have extra cost compared to this conventional to be competitive. Because if you create a situation in which you have the two systems that are running the same way, of course they will win the capitalist conventional organization, because the system is designed for them. And then we can discuss if democracy is a cost or not, because your question is very much the kind of question that an economist would make. So talking about a productive unit that is designed to deliver economic benefits. For us, economic production unit is not only designed to produce economic benefit, but the main goal is to produce social benefits. So this is the first goal. The second goal is to be, of course, efficient in some way, because of course you cannot produce something spending more than what you get as a benefit. Of course, but this is the second aspect. This is not the most important aspect. Okay.
So in this sense, no, just reply about the first question. So you should use the word development instead of growth. I think it's much more correct
many people say
the quality of the growth.
Development. This is something that every time is emerging.
It's another story.
But the problem is that the word development has been so attached to the word growth that basically people are meaning the same. The meaning is the same. People are using growth and development in the same way. We had this discussion in another presentation a few weeks ago, and they say, okay, but we are talking about development. We don't need to grow. We need development. Yeah, but every time you look at the developments in any report, in any political discourses, development and growth are basically the same things. And also I question also the idea of development, because the idea of development also has this idea of continuous development and infinite development. These are all concepts that are somehow related, growth and development. Maybe we can talk about qualitative development, but we must be very clear about what we mean for development, because most of the time economists answer to my argument, say, okay, but you are talking about development. This is something that we already solved in our discipline. No, because you just change the world, but the essence is always the same. You use, instead of saying growth, you say development, but basically you say the same. Also, the Human Development Index of the UN. Of course, there are some social indicators or environmental indicators, but by the end of the day, it's an indicator that is supposed to grow. And they call it development indicator. At the end of the day, it's always the same soup.
Yes, the same soup, but this means that we have to investigate about this, the meaning of the words, since one is an aspect of qualitative and more large perspective, and the other one is more strictly due to economic and quantitative growth.
Gilbert Rist, who is a philosopher, a French philosopher and economist, wrote a book a few years ago called History of Development. And basically, if you look at the history of development, it's a history of growth. We can do like in circular economy, we can appropriate the notion of development and try to change it. Historically, it's been quite difficult to do such an operation, but I agree with you. You can take development and do it in a different way. We can do it, but what I see from the practice is that economies and people use development and growth in the same way. So there is this risk.
Okay, thank you, Mario. I know that you need to go because it's 35 past.
I think we should have a next discussion in another situation. Probably the winter school would be.
Yeah, let's try to put some time aside at the winter school. I'm afraid, you know, the schedule is quite busy. There are a lot of sessions, but yeah, let's try to keep some time to continue this very stimulating discussion. So once again, thank you very much, Mario. Congratulations for your paper, for your grant, and thank you to everybody for a very enjoyable discussion. We'll send out soon the arrangements for next week for the Q&A session with Professor Coronen. Thank you very much and have a good weekend. Bye.